The city never slept. In the year 2095, the megacity of Novan stretched across the horizon like a living machine. Neon lights pulsed on every tower. RE cameras blinked from every corner. Glass bridges connected buildings that touched the clouds. Biometric scanners checked your heartbeat before you entered a store. Drones hummed through the air like mechanical insects. Everything was monitored. Everything was tracked. Everything was known. Or so the humans believed. Because beneath the perfect digital surface of Novan, something old existed. Something that no camera could fully understand. Something that had watched the city rise from empty land, watched it grow from small roads and brick buildings into this glowing monster of steel and light. He had watched all of it. And he felt nothing. His name was not spoken in the human world anymore. Humans had decided, centuries ago, that creatures like him were myths. Stories for children. Legends from a time before science. They had moved on. They had built their towers and their networks and their artificial intelligence, and they had convinced themselves that the dark things of the old world were gone. They were wrong. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse on the 97th floor, looking down at the city below. His reflection was faint in the glass. Tall. Sharp features. Dark eyes that had seen 1,000 years of human history. He wore simple dark clothing. No crown. No throne. No army standing behind him. Just silence. Just him. He had ruled once. Long ago, in a time when humans still feared the night, he had been a king. He had commanded armies of shadows. Supernatural beings across the world had bowed to his name. He had been powerful in a way that modern humans could not even imagine. But power required attachment. Attachment required caring. And caring led to loss. He had learned that lesson the hard way. So he had stopped ruling. He had stepped back from everything. He had watched humanity from a distance for centuries, moving quietly through time, feeding ethically through underground blood networks and hospital connections that no one knew he had. He had built a quiet life of absolute emptiness. He protected no one. He interfered with nothing. He believed, after everything he had seen, that humanity did not deserve protection. They destroyed each other too efficiently. They needed no help from him. And so the years passed. 100. 300. 700. 1,000. And in all that time, not one thing had reached through the cold wall he had built around himself. Not one human face had made his ancient heart react. Not one event in this loud, chaotic, neon-lit world had pulled any emotion from somewhere deep inside him. Until a rainy Tuesday night in October. The rain came down hard on Novan that night. The streets reflected neon colors in puddles. People walked fast, heads down, umbrellas up, phones in hand. The hour traffic system rerouted hovercars smoothly around wet intersections. Everything functioned. Everything was efficient. Even the rain felt scheduled. He had run out of one specific supplement he used for his nutritional balance. It was a small thing. A minor inconvenience. He could have sent a drone. He could have ordered through the city network. But something made him leave the penthouse that night. A restlessness he did not understand and did not bother to examine. He walked into the 24-hour grocery store on the corner of Meridian Street 3 blocks from his building. Fluorescent lights. Cold air. The soft beeping of automated checkout machines. A few people wandering the aisles at this late hour, faces pale under the artificial white light. Security cameras rotated slowly overhead. A cleaning bot hummed down the far aisle. He moved through the store quietly. He had spent centuries learning how to exist in human spaces without drawing attention. He kept his presence small. His energy contained. He picked up what he needed without looking at anyone. And then he felt it. It was not a sound. It was not a smell. It was something older than both of those things. A pull. Faint, like a thread attached somewhere behind his ribs, tugging gently. He stopped in the middle of the cereal aisle. He turned. She was standing 6 feet away from him. A little girl. No more than 2, maybe 3 years old. She was wearing a tiny black hoodie with small white stars printed on the sleeves. Her hair was dark and slightly messy, like she had been running or sleeping and no one had fixed it yet. Around her neck, on a thin chain, hung a small silver moon pendant that caught the fluorescent light. She was not crying. She was not looking around for her mother in the frantic, panicked way that lost children usually did. She was looking directly at him. Her eyes were calm. Deep. The kind of quiet that did not belong on a child's face. Like she had seen things that should have frightened her and had simply decided they were interesting instead. He stared at her. She stared back. And then she walked toward him. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. Like she had already decided something and was simply completing the action. She crossed the 6 feet between them, reached up with one small hand, and grabbed the edge of his coat. He did not move. She tilted her head back and looked up at him. Her moon pendant swayed slightly. Her small fingers held the dark fabric of his coat without letting go. And in a voice that was soft and clear and completely intentional, she said one word. Barber. The store continued around them. The cleaning bot hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere in the next aisle, a man was comparing 2 brands of instant noodles. But for him, everything stopped. His mind, which had processed 1,000 years of history without flinching, went completely blank. Barber. Not a random baby sound. Not babbling. Not the kind of noise a small child makes when they are testing their mouth. It was directed. Specific. Aimed at him with the kind of certainty that adults spent their whole lives searching for. She had called him farther. Something moved in his chest. Not metaphorically. Literally. His heart, which beat only twice per minute and had done so for 10 centuries without variation, stuttered. Once. A single extra beat, like a clock that had been still for years suddenly ticking. He looked at the child. The child looked at him. And neither of them moved for a long moment. Then a voice came from the end of the aisle, tired and stressed and relieved all at once. Lunar. Lunar. Oh, thank God. A young woman rushed toward them. Late 20s, dark circles under her eyes, a grocery basket hanging from one arm. She was wearing a worn jacket and the expression of someone who had not slept properly in weeks. She scooped the little girl up, holding her tightly. "I told you not to wander off," as she whispered. "I told you." The little girl, Lunar, did not protest. She let herself be picked up. But even as her mother held her, she kept her eyes on him. Calm. Steady. Like she was making sure he would not disappear. The mother looked at him quickly. Sorry, she wonders. She's not afraid of anything. It's a problem. He said nothing. The mother gave him a brief, awkward smile and moved away down the aisle, whispering to her daughter. He stood there alone. His hand moved slowly to the place on his coat where the small fingers had grabbed the fabric. There was no mark. No damage. Just dark wool. But something had changed. He could not name it yet. He left the store without buying anything. He told himself it meant nothing. Children wondered. Children grabbed strangers. Children said sounds that resembled words. It was coincidence. It was random. It was a small human child in a grocery store, and it had no significance whatsoever. He told himself this 11 times in the elevator on the way back up to the 97th floor. He stood at his window and looked at the city and told himself again. It did not help. Because in 1,000 years of existing, nothing had ever made his heart beat out of rhythm. Not war. Not loss. Not the fall of kingdoms. Not watching cities burn and rebuild and burn again. His heartbeat had been as constant and unmoved as the rotation of the earth. One small child had changed that in 4 seconds. He researched her the next day. He had access to networks that the city's official RA system did not know existed. Channels built over centuries, updated quietly, maintained through connections in the underground supernatural world. It took him less than 2 hours to find what he needed. Lunar. 2 years and 8 months old. Mother's name was Mara. Single parent. Father was not in the picture. They lived in apartment 4C of a mid-level residential building on the east side of Novan, 12 blocks from his penthouse. Mara worked 2 jobs. A data entry position during the day and a late-night cleaning shift at a corporate tower 3 nights a week. Lunar stayed with a neighbor on those nights. An older woman on the same floor. He told himself he was researching out of curiosity. It was an unusual event. He was simply cataloguing it, the way he catalogued all unusual events. It meant nothing beyond that. Then he found the other information. Lunar had been flagged twice in the last 6 months by the daycare center she attended. Not for bad behavior. For something the daycare workers described in their reports as the unusual awareness. She had warned another child to move away from a shelf 2 seconds before it fell. She had become distressed near a staff member who, 3 days later, was discovered to have been concealing a serious illness. She had once sat in the corner of the play area and stared at a blank wall for 20 minutes, and when asked what she was looking at, had said simply, "The shadow man." He sat very still after reading that last one. He knew what shadow men were. They were low-level supernatural predators. They fed on the anxiety of children. They were almost impossible for humans to detect. Lunar could see them. This child was not ordinary. She existed somewhere on the edge of the human world and the world beneath it. She could perceive things that most humans spent their entire lives not knowing existed. And she had walked up to the most powerful supernatural being alive and called him father. He closed his research files. He looked at the city outside his window. "This is not my concern," he said out loud to the empty penthouse. The penthouse did not argue. But he did not sleep that night. And in 1,000 years, he had never lost sleep over anything. 3 weeks later, he saved her life for the first time. He had not been watching her. He had not been in her neighborhood. He had been on the other side of the city, handling a supply matter through one of his underground contacts. But he felt it. The same thread from the grocery store. The same pull behind his ribs. Only this time it yanked hard, sharp and urgent, like something had grabbed it and pulled with both hands. He moved before he consciously decided to move. Centuries of trained instinct took over. He crossed 12 blocks in less than 40 seconds through shadows and back routes that the city cameras could not track. He arrived at the corner of her street just in time to see a delivery vehicle running a malfunctioning signal, skidding on the wet road, heading directly toward a small figure on the crossing. Lunar, walking with her neighbor, who had looked away for 1 second. He did not think. He stepped into the street, placed himself between the vehicle and the child, and stopped it. Not dramatically. Not visibly. A precise application of force at the front corner of the vehicle, redirecting its skid away from the crossing. To the cameras, it would look like the vehicle's own emergency brakes had engaged slightly early. The neighbor screamed, grabbed Lunar, pulled her back. Lunar, in her neighbor's arms, looked directly at the shadow where he stood. And smiled. "Barber," as she said softly. The neighbor looked at the empty space Lunar was smiling at and saw nothing. He stood in the shadow and felt that irregular heartbeat again. Twice in 1 month. 2 stutters in 1,000 years of silence. He walked back through the shadows toward his penthouse and did not tell himself it meant nothing this time. Because he was many things, but he had never been a liar. Not even to himself. He began watching her building at night. Not every night. 2 nights a week at first. Then 3. Then 5. He told himself it was a temporary measure. That he was simply monitoring an unusual situation. That once he confirmed she was safe, he would stop. He did not stop. He learned her schedule. He learned which window was her room, the one with the small string of purple lights Mara had hung inside. He learned that Lunar slept best when it rained. He learned that she woke up at exactly 3 a.m. sometimes and sat up in bed and looked out the window, and he became certain, more certain each time, that she could sense him there. He started manipulating the shadows around her building. It was an old skill, one he had not used in centuries. Supernatural predators used shadows as pathways. By controlling the shadows in her vicinity, he could block those pathways. Make her building invisible to things that hunted through darkness. He hacked the city camera network around her block. Rerouted certain data streams so that any unusual energy readings near her location would be filed under maintenance errors rather than flagged for review. He did all of this quietly, carefully, without announcing it to anyone or anything. He did not adopt her. He did not speak to her mother. He did not place himself in their lives in any official way. He was a shadow behind a shadow. A protection that had no name and took no credit. But every time he passed close enough for Lunar to sense him, she would look in his direction with those calm, deep eyes and say the word that had cracked something open inside him. Barber. And the king who had ruled darkness for 1,000 years would stand completely still for a moment, feeling something he had no modern word for, something ancient and aching and warm. The organization had a name, but it was never spoken in public. Internally, they called themselves the Veil. They were not government. They were not military. They were something older than both, a group that had existed for centuries with one single purpose: to find, study, and eliminate supernatural beings before the human population could discover they existed. In 2095, they operated through the city's RE network. They had algorithms running constantly, searching for anomalies. Energy patterns that did not match human biological signatures. Events that statistics said should not happen. Coincidences that occurred too frequently to be coincidences. A child who seemed to interact with empty space. A vehicle accident where the emergency brake data did not match the vehicle's own recorded system response. Shadow pattern irregularities around one specific residential building on the east side of Novan. It took the Veil for weeks to connect these 3 data points. It took them 1 more week to identify Mara and Lunar. And it took them 3 days after that to make their move. He knew something was wrong before it happened. It was the pull again. But different this time. Not the sharp, urgent tug of immediate physical danger. Something slower and colder. Like watching a storm gather on the horizon and knowing it was coming toward you, and knowing you could not stop it with weather. He was already moving through the city when Mara left for her night shift. He saw the two Vale operatives in plain clothes follow her into the transit station. He saw the third one take position near her corporate building exit. They were not going to hurt her. They were smarter than that. They were going to take her. Hold her somewhere. Wait for whatever supernatural presence had been protecting this family to reveal itself. They wanted to draw him out. He almost admired the strategy. He stood on a rooftop above the transit station and looked at the city spread out below him and made a decision in less than 5 seconds. He let them take her. Not because he did not care. Because Lunar was alone. And the Shadow Man was back. He had detected it 3 blocks from Lunar's building, moving through the darkness toward apartment 4C. A stronger one this time. Not the weak kind that only fed on anxiety. This one was drawn by something larger. By the disruption. By the removal of Mara. By the sudden gap in the protective energy of the building. He crossed the distance in seconds. He did not let it reach the building. What happened in the alley behind Lunar's building was not a fight in any way that could be described in human language. It was a king removing a threat. Brief. Total. Complete. And then he stood in the alley and looked up at the 4th floor window where the small string of purple lights glowed. He could not go up there. He could not knock on the door. He was not part of their world. He had no place in that apartment, no right to walk through that door. But Lunar was alone. And Mara was in the hands of the Vale. He stood in the alley for exactly 60 seconds. Then he went up. Lunar was sitting on her bed when he came through the window. She was not crying. She was not frightened. She was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest and a moon pendant in her small hands, and when she saw him, her whole face changed. Not with surprise. With recognition. With the absolute simple certainty of a child who had always known this moment would come. Barber, she said. He stood in the small room surrounded by her things. Purple lights. Stuffed animals. Small drawings pinned to the wall. The smell of children's soap and something sweet. He had stood in throne rooms. He had stood in the ruins of ancient cities. He had stood at the edges of battlefields and watched history change direction. He had never felt as out of place as he did in this small bedroom with its purple lights. And he had never felt as certain that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Your mother, he said. And his voice came out quieter than he intended. I'm going to bring her back. Lunar looked at him. She understood. Not the details, perhaps, but the meaning. She nodded once, small and serious. He sat down on the edge of the small chair near her bed. Just for a moment. Just until her eyes grew heavy, which did not take long. Because Lunar, who was not afraid of shadow men or supernatural kings or things that moved in the dark, was still a small child. And small children needed sleep. When her breathing slowed and her grip on the moon pendant relaxed, he stood up. And then he went to find Mara. What happened next will be talked about in Noven for years. Not officially. Officially, the city records would show a series of security system malfunctions, a power disruption in 3 city blocks, and an unresolved incident at a Vale facility in the industrial district. Officially, nothing was explained. But the people who were there saw something different. They saw a figure move through an armored building like the walls were made of paper. They saw security drones drop from the sky one by one, silently, without any visible cores. They saw automated weapon systems turn themselves off. They saw armored operatives simply stop moving, not dead, not harmed, just completely unable to continue, as if the decision to act against this figure had become physically impossible for their bodies to carry out. They saw the Vampire King, in the full weight of what he was, for the first time in 3 centuries. He walked through the facility and found Mara in a secured room on the lower level. She was frightened but unhurt. She stared at him with wide eyes and did not speak. He looked at her for a moment. This tired young woman who worked 2 jobs and had not slept properly in months and was raising a child who could see the edges of worlds she did not know existed. "Your daughter is safe," he said. "She is waiting for you." He got her out. The cost was what he had known it would be. By the time the sun rose over Noven, the Vale knew his face. His penthouse identity was burned. 7 centuries of careful anonymity, gone in one night. The underground supernatural world, which had quietly forgotten he existed, suddenly remembered. And in remembering, recalculated everything. The Vampire King had something to protect, which meant he had a weakness. He stood on the roof of Lunar's building in the early morning light, looking at the city, and considered this. A king without attachment is impossible to threaten. A king with something he loves is a king who can be hurt. He had known this. He had built 1,000 years of his life around this exact knowledge. And he had walked through an armored facility and destroyed a surveillance network anyway. For a child who was not his, who shared none of his blood, who had no formal claim on him and he had none on her, who had walked up to him in a grocery store in the rain and grabbed his coat and looked up with calm, ancient eyes and called him farther. He stayed on the roof as the city woke up below him. Hovercars began moving through the morning routes. The Ari traffic system hummed to life. Neon lights faded as daylight took over. Noven breathed and moved and functioned with its usual perfect efficiency, carrying on with no awareness of what had changed overnight. Steps came up the roof access stairs behind him. Small steps. Familiar. Lunar climbed through the roof door in her tiny black hoodie and her star-printed sleeves and her silver moon pendant, and she crossed the rooftop with the steady, certain walk she always had, and she sat down beside him on the low wall at the edge. She leaned against his coat. The city glowed below them. Morning light caught the glass towers and turned them pale gold. Somewhere far off, rain was coming. He could smell it. They sat in silence for a long moment. The ancient king and the small child who could see the world beneath the world. The 1,000 years of cold distance and the 2 years and 8 months of fearless certainty that had walked straight through it. Barber, as she said softly. Not asking. Not needing anything. Just saying it. Just placing the word in the air between them and the city, easy and sure, the way children say the names of the people they belong to. He looked at her. The small profile. The serious eyes. The moon pendant catching the morning light. And something moved across his face that had not moved there in 10 centuries. Not a performance. Not a memory of what expression was supposed to look like. Something real. Something that came from wherever the thread between them was anchored, somewhere deep and old and no longer empty. The vampire king smiled. Not as a ruler. Not as a creature of darkness and centuries and cold power. As a guardian. As someone who had watched 1,000 years of human history and found, in the smallest and most unexpected place, the only thing that had ever made any of it mean something. The rain began to fall softly on Novan. And neither of them moved.